Namaste. This is the AI Samachar, and today is the 21st of January, 2025.
Ah, yes,
You've given us a fascinating mix of sources today.
indeed we have.
Financial reports, industry news, even some political intrigue. Buckle up,
Oh, yeah.
because we're about to go on a deep dive into the happenings of the day. We've got EV makers
EV makers.
setting their sights on India, whispers of another telecom tariff hike,
Oh,
and a helicopter mysteriously grounded ahead of the Republic Day flypast.
fascinating stuff.
It is.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how global currents are impacting India right now. The return of former U.S. President Donald Trump is causing quite a stir.
Especially for Indian business leaders.
Right.
The sources highlight a lot of concern about Trump's T factor,
The D factor.
his unpredictable style, and the potential for trade disruptions. Kumar Mangalam Birla,
Oh, yeah.
the chairman of the Aditya Birla Group, even called it a major factor to watch this year.
And remember, the U.S. is India's biggest export market, so any trade tensions could have serious consequences. Some experts are worried about a potential trade war,
A trade war.
while others believe Trump's renewed focus on China might actually benefit India if it strengthens its economic reforms.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
It is.
Trump's tough stance on immigration could actually end up pushing tech jobs towards India. With restrictions on H-1B visas, companies might start looking to India as an alternative source for skilled tech workers, especially with the U.S. potentially facing a shortage of over 1 million tech jobs by the end of the decade.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, it really shows how interconnected the global economy is. What happens in one part of the world can have ripple effects everywhere. Speaking of which, the rupee's depreciation against the dollar is making headlines.
It is a concern, but it's important to look at the bigger picture. The rupee has actually appreciated against other currencies, suggesting that India's balance of payments might be more resilient than it first appears.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good
Yeah.
point. It's not just about the rupee-dollar exchange rate. We also need to consider the recent dip in foreign exchange reserves. They're down about $23.5 billion since their peak in September 2024.
So the RBI has been selling dollars to stabilize the rupee, which impacts the reserves. But then again, foreign portfolio investment outflows are also a natural part of the economic cycle.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And those outflows can actually be a tool to manage the rupee's value.
A tool.
It's a constant balancing act for the RBI.
So they've got their work cut out for them.
They do. On a related note, there's a big push to attract more foreign investment, especially from sovereign wealth funds and pension funds.
Yes, and some are calling for the government to extend the sunset clause for tax benefits to incentivize these investors,
Interesting.
particularly since infrastructure development is so crucial for India's economic growth. Now let's switch gears to something a bit closer to home. It looks like we might be in for another round of telecom tariff hikes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Telecom tariff hikes.
The word on the street is that Reliance Jio might be the first to make a move, possibly aiming to increase their average revenue per user ARPU ahead of their anticipated IPO.
Okay.
This could have a ripple effect across the entire telecom sector.
Makes sense. Higher ARPUs typically mean better profits, which can then be reinvested in improving network infrastructure and expanding services. It's a cycle.
It is a cycle. But moving on to the business world, the production-linked incentive scheme for white goods seems to be gaining momentum.
Absolutely. With 84 companies now committed and a projected investment of over 10,478 crore, this initiative is set to give domestic manufacturing and job creation a serious boost.
It's a win-win situation. And while we're on the topic of industries getting a boost, the aviation sector is hoping that the proposed aircraft leasing bill will take off soon. The goal is to make it cheaper for airlines to lease aircraft, which could ultimately lead to lower airfares for passengers.
That's the hope. But the recent NCLT decision to liquidate Go First's assets throws a bit of a wrench into things. It definitely raises questions about the overall health of the airline industry.
It's a developing situation for sure. Now, in the world of technology and innovation, there are some positive developments with SEBI easing norms for social stock exchanges.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is.
Yeah, tell me more.
This is a big step towards making it easier for nonprofit organizations to access funding, which could encourage social entrepreneurship and support initiatives that focus on social good.
And speaking of innovation for a good cause, scientists at NITK have developed a technology to make edible aroids irritation-free.
That's fascinating.
Aroids.
They have a lot of potential as a food source, but their high oxalate content can cause irritation. This technology could open up new possibilities for this underutilized resource.
That is really fascinating.
Oh.
Here's where things get really interesting. India is on track to become the world's largest importer of LNG in 2024.
Wow.
This reflects the increasing demand for energy from both industry and the power sector and raises important questions about India's energy security and the transition to cleaner fuels.
A lot to think about. Shifting gears back to the agricultural sector, despite a smaller mustard acreage this year, productivity is expected to remain high. Plus, researchers are working on developing shorter duration varieties to adapt to climate change.
Food security is paramount, and these research efforts are crucial for ensuring a stable supply of essential crops.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of agricultural commodities, the government is taking a firm stance on sugar. Sugar mills caught selling excess sugar in the local market are being barred from export quotas.
This highlights the government's commitment to regulating sugar prices and ensuring sufficient domestic supply. It's a delicate balancing act to meet the needs of both consumers and producers.
Speaking of balancing acts, let's turn our attention to the weather. The IMD is predicting continued rainfall in South India.
Interesting. Even as the northeast monsoon winds down, a cyclonic circulation over the Gulf of Mannar is keeping things wet. It's a reminder that weather patterns can be quite unpredictable.
Definitely. And speaking of unpredictable, we've got to talk about this grounded Dhruv ALH helicopter. It's been pulled from the Republic Day flypast, and the reasons are still unclear.
It is a curious situation, and hopefully we'll get more information soon. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more story that deserves our attention.
The sentencing of Sanjay Roy to life imprisonment for the rape and murder of that junior doctor?
Yes. It's a tragic case that highlights a much larger conversation about safety and security, particularly for women in the medical profession. It's a conversation that needs to continue.
On a different note, there's been some interesting news from the world of finance.
You're talking about Motilal Oswal AMC and their clarification regarding their investments in Kalyan Jewelers.
Exactly. It seems the company's stock took a hit due to some rumors circulating on social media, but the clarification helped the stock rebound. It just goes to show how sensitive the market can be to unverified information, especially in this age of instant news.
It's a good reminder to be cautious about the information we consume and to double-check the source. Speaking of the market, Kotak Mahindra Bank posted some impressive Q3 results.
They did. A strong balance sheet and better-than-expected asset quality are definitely attracting attention. It's a positive sign for the banking sector as a whole.
And on the topic of positive signs, disbursements under the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana hit an all-time high in Q3.
That's fantastic news. It means more small businesses are getting the funding they need to grow and thrive. This will have a ripple effect on job creation and the overall economy.
Access to credit is crucial for empowering entrepreneurs and driving economic growth. And speaking of access, the RBI is making changes to streamline how asset reconstruction companies, ARCs, function.
It seems like the focus is on making it easier for ARCs to resolve those smaller loans, which could be beneficial for both borrowers and lenders. It could free up capital and resources that can then be used more productively.
Exactly. Switching back to corporate news, Indian Overseas Bank also reported strong Q3 profits.
They're actually on track to hit 1,000 crore in profit for Q4, fueled by increased interest income and recoveries from written-off accounts. Plus, their gross NPA ratio improved significantly, dropping to 2.55%. It shows their commitment to strengthening asset quality.
Very impressive. And Bank of India also had a solid Q3 performance with a 45% jump in net profit, driven by healthy growth in both advances and deposits.
What's also noteworthy is their decline in overall provisions, particularly for bad loans. This points to improving asset quality and a more optimistic outlook for the future.
Absolutely. Now let's move to the startup world.
Findi Ltd. Acquired Bankit Services for $30 million, aiming to expand their reach in the rural and semi-urban financial services market.
It's exciting to see this kind of activity. It shows confidence in the Indian market and highlights the growing role of fintech in closing the financial inclusion gap. Speaking of inclusion, SEBI is working on simplifying the rules for social stock exchanges.
This could potentially open up new avenues for social enterprises to raise capital and further their mission. It's a positive step towards a more inclusive and sustainable financial ecosystem. But let's not forget about the ongoing debate regarding customs duty on telecom equipment.
Right. The industry is urging the government to reduce the customs duty, arguing that it's hindering the rollout of 5G services. It's a complex issue with long-term consequences for India's digital ambitions. They raise a valid point about the need to strike a balance between promoting domestic manufacturing and ensuring affordable access to technology.
And speaking of complex issues, the government's decision to bar sugar mills that oversold in the local market from export quotas is causing quite a stir in the industry.
It sends a clear message that the government is serious about stabilizing domestic sugar prices and ensuring adequate supply for consumers. As we mentioned earlier, it's a delicate balancing act.
Indeed. And the Erkanet sector is facing its own set of challenges.
There's growing concern about diseases affecting areca plants and the World Health Organization's classification of erkanut as a carcinogen. This is putting pressure on the government to address these issues and provide support to farmers.
It's a tough situation for sure. And to add to the complexity, the IMD predicts continued rainfall in South India, even though the northeast monsoon is waning.
It seems the cyclonic circulation over the Gulf of Mannar is contributing to the wet conditions. Speaking of things taking an unexpected turn, remember that grounded Dhruv ALH helicopter.
The one that was supposed to be in the Republic Day fly past. Any updates on that?
The mystery continues. The reason for its grounding is still unclear. On a more serious note, the Kolkata court sentenced Sanjay Roy to life imprisonment for the rape and murder of a junior doctor.
It's a heartbreaking case that underscores the urgent need for improved security measures, particularly for women working in healthcare.
Absolutely. Shifting gears to the stock market, the Sensex and Nifty had a strong start to the week, fueled by renewed interest in banking stocks.
It seems investors are feeling positive about the banking sector's performance.
While some sectors saw gains, others faced selling pressure like insurance stocks. It's all part of the natural ebb and flow of the market.
It certainly is. And while we're talking about companies making moves, Stallion India Fluorochemicals saw their IPO heavily oversubscribed.
That's a strong sign of investor confidence in the company's future. And speaking of confidence, Wipro's stock jumped almost 7% after surpassing earnings expectations for Q3.
It seems like the tech sector is still going strong.
Meanwhile, SEBI's busy clearing 6 new IPOs, but also rejected Anand Rathi's application.
It's a reminder that the regulatory landscape is constantly evolving, and companies need to stay ahead of the curve to secure those approvals. Moving on to something more consumer-focused. Zomato is celebrating a milestone.
Their quick commerce business Blinkit has crossed the 1,000 store mark, which is quite impressive. They're on track to reach their goal of 2,000 stores much sooner than anticipated.
It looks like the quick commerce space is heating up with consumers embracing the convenience of speedy deliveries.
Definitely. But even with this rapid expansion, Zomato's consolidated net profit dipped slightly in Q3.
Possibly due to those accelerated investments in scaling up Blinkit.
It's a classic case of short-term pain for potential long-term gain. They're making strategic moves that could pay off significantly in the future.
Now back to the world of finance. What's the latest on sovereign wealth funds and their interest in India?
There's a lot of discussion about extending the sunset clause for those tax benefits that attract these funds, considering their crucial role in infrastructure development.
It appears the government is keen on incentivizing these funds to invest in projects vital for India's long-term growth.
Exactly. But it's a balancing act, as some argue that these tax benefits should be phased out gradually to ensure a level playing field for all investors.
That's a fair point. Let's circle back to Reliance Jio and those potential tariff hikes.
It seems like another round of price increases is on the horizon.
The speculation is they're trying to increase their ARPUs ahead of their IPO. And often when Jio raises tariffs, other telecom companies follow suit.
It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds and its impact on consumers. And speaking of potential impacts, the proposed aircraft leasing bill is creating quite a buzz.
It aims to make leasing aircraft more affordable for airlines, which could eventually translate to lower airfares for passengers.
That's the hope. But the recent NCLT decision to liquidate Go First's assets raises concerns about the overall stability of the airline industry.
It's a developing situation we'll need to monitor closely. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from global trade tensions and Donald Trump's return to power to the exciting advancements in food technology with those irritation-free aeroids.
And we explored the ups and downs of the stock market, the government's attempts to regulate key sectors like sugar, and even a mysterious grounded helicopter.
It's been a whirlwind of information, hasn't it?
It has a lot to unpack.
From the global landscape to hyper-local developments, it really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely. And how rapidly things can shift.
Speaking of change, Kumar Mangalam Birla had a striking way of putting it. He called this a U3 world. Uncertain, unpredictable, and unorthodox.
A U3 world. I like that. It's an apt description given all that we've unpacked today.
Definitely. But even amidst the uncertainty and constant change, we've also uncovered exciting opportunities emerging.
Oh, absolutely. From the booming EV market in India to those advancements in social entrepreneurship, there are definitely reasons to be optimistic.
Absolutely. Remember that grounded helicopter we talked about earlier? No clear explanation yet on what happened? And the proposed aircraft leasing bill. Will it really lead to lower airfares? Especially considering the go first situation.
So many questions still.
A lot of open questions.
Yeah,
And that's where you come in.
that's right.
We've given you the information, the different perspectives, the key takeaways. Now it's time for you to connect the dots. What resonates most with you? What trends will you be watching closely in the days and weeks ahead?
How will you navigate this complex, ever-changing world we live in?
That's what the AI Samachar is all about, equipping you with the knowledge and insights you need to not just understand the world,
Right.
but to engage with it.
To really engage.
Yeah.
Yeah, think critically, challenge assumptions, explore different viewpoints.
And always stay curious.
For queries and advertisements, email to the iSamachar@gmail.com.